Modern-day construction work demands cranes capable of lifting vast loads of concrete and steel. It can be difficult and dangerous work on dry land. But when the construction site is in the middle of the ocean, moving huge concrete engineering blocks is both complex and extremely hazardous. So, how do they do it? It's a blustery morning here in Wakasa Bay on the east coast of Japan, and teams of engineers are hard at work because the Port Authority has a problem. It's impossible for the latest generation of huge ships to dock at the harbour. It's simply too small and exposed. So now they're extending the harbour breakwater to over 1,300 metres long. And that means they'll have to shift dozens of huge concrete blocks out into deep water. To make matters worse, these blocks are at a cement factory over 80 kilometres away. Each of these blocks weighs 2,500 tonnes, which means it's going to require some serious lifting gear simply to get them off the factory dockside. So it's time to call in Yorigami Construction's largest floating crane. Or as she's known to her friends, Kaisho. At 120 metres long and over 120 metres tall, Kaisho is the zenith of crane engineering. She can lift a staggering 4,100 tonnes and can happily pluck a Navy warship clean out of the water. Kaisho's unique power ensures she's in constant demand around the seas of Japan and Asia. That means commuting to work is not an option for her 14-strong crew of pilots, engineers and riggers who must live and work on board for months at a time. Their only consolation is a diet of regular exotic meals from their dedicated chef. The crew are immensely proud of Kaisho, and the walls of the mess room are adorned with mementos of her conquests. But no one is more proud than her long-serving captain, Mr. Tadashi.
I've been the captain for 20 years, and I'm really proud to be involved in her epic adventures.
It's early Tuesday morning when Kaisho arrives at the docks in Mikuni. Due to her vast size, fitting her with her own engine was impractical. So instead, she's towed by a flotilla of 3 tugs, Hosho, Imo and Kongo. Meanwhile, it's up to Vice Captain Sueo to steer Kaisho. It's a huge responsibility, because with a hull the size of a football field, Kaisho is truly enormous. The slightest miscalculation could result in her crashing catastrophically into the dockside.
Kaisho's massive, and it's an enormous responsibility steering her. The only way I can do the job is if I pretend I'm actually the skipper of a much smaller boat.
Whilst Vice Captain Sueo steers, the tugs Hosho and Imo help nudge her carefully left and right, while Kongo acts as a vital brake. But as they approach the dockside, torrential rain begins to lash down, quickly reducing visibility and making conditions extremely hazardous. The tugs are now unable to maneuver Kaisho with sufficient accuracy, so the shore team lowers 2 special anchors connected to winches on her rear deck. 2 more cables are then run from the front of the boat, and by winching these lines, the team is able to slowly maneuver Kaisho into position. After almost an hour, Kaisho is finally in place at the dockside, and as soon as she's docked, the riggers set to work preparing the concrete block. The first task is to fit Kaisho with a special lifting rig, which must be precisely positioned on top of the huge block. With the rain hammering down, it's a hazardous procedure, as the heavy steel lines become wet and hard to grip. It takes the team 3 hours battling against the weather before the rig is finally fitted. And at last they're ready for the main event, lifting the concrete monolith. Kaisho may not have powered propulsion, but inside her giant hull, 4 huge generators roar into life. These power 4 gigantic winches, each over 2 meters high. But these winches alone would be incapable of lifting the 2,500-ton concrete blocks were it not for the ancient Greek discovery of the pulley system. By feeding the steel cable through a series of multiple pulleys, Kaisho's lifting power is increased tenfold. And as the cables take the full weight of the load, the concrete block begins to inch away from the dockside. But as soon as Kaisho takes the weight of the block, she immediately begins to tip forward, and the crew must act quickly to prevent her overbalancing. On the control deck, they compensate for this imbalance by pumping water from the ballast tanks at the front to tanks at the rear, while her tug team bring in a special ocean-going barge onto which Kaisho carefully lowers the block. Four hours later, the lift has been completed, and Kaisho's crew can finally eat and relax. Tomorrow is going to be another challenging day. It's 7 a.m. on day 2, and Kaisho is on the move again. Overnight, the block has been transported to Wakasa Bay and is now awaiting installation. But the bad news is, by the time Kaisho arrives, it's blowing a gale, making this second lift a serious challenge. So to keep her from drifting out to sea, the crew deploy her 4 huge anchors, while the tugs work to keep her stable. Once the riggers have reattached Kaisho's pallet, the lift slowly begins.
Oh, hey.
They first raise the block half a meter off the barge. At this point, they'd normally simply remove the barge from under the block, but the strong currents are making it too dangerous and force the team's hand. Today, Kaisho must do all the work, and Captain Tadashi uses Kaisho's anchor winches to pull her backwards, away from the barge. These are anxious moments, the waves and wind testing the skill of the team. Once safely clear of the boat, Kaisho can finally lower the block into the sea. Despite weighing 2,500 tons, because of its hollow design, the concrete block actually floats, and the grateful harbour team can now tow it away to be installed. In total, it's taken 48 hours to move the concrete block. But there are still many more blocks to be transported before the new harbour breakwater is finished. That means Kaisho and her crew will be busy here for some time yet, which at least gives her onboard chef plenty of opportunity to test his latest culinary creations on the dedicated full-time crew.